Welcome to Tech Disruptions, deep dives into the technologies reshaping industries, from AI to quantum to biotech. Let's get into it. Okay, so everyone's been screaming about AI taking our jobs, right? The robots are coming for the call center, for the truck driver, for the factory floor. But what if I told you the jobs most exposed to AI right now, the ones seeing actual real-world automation, are held by people who are older, female, more educated, and earning 47% more than the average worker?
And not only that, but despite this significant exposure, we're not seeing a massive wave of unemployment yet. That's the real kicker here. It defies so much of the conventional wisdom.
Wait, so the highly paid, highly educated people are actually the first in the crosshairs, at least in terms of task automation? That feels counterintuitive to every sci-fi movie I've ever seen.
It absolutely does, and it's why this new research introduces a completely different way of looking at AI's impact, moving beyond just theoretical potential to what's actually happening in the trenches.
All right, so let's dig into that. Because for years, we've had these grand pronouncements about AI's impact on the labor market. Remember the early 2010s? Everything was about offshore ability or robot-proof jobs. And then, not much happened. Or at least, not in the way everyone predicted. Why has it been so hard to get this right?
Exactly. The paper really highlights this history of humility, right? They point to prominent studies from a decade ago that said roughly a quarter of U.S. jobs were vulnerable to offshoring. Fast forward, and most of those jobs have seen healthy employment growth. Or take robots. Studies on their employment effects reach opposing conclusions. Even the China shock in manufacturing, which was massive, still has economists debating the scale of job losses.
So it's not just that the crystal ball was foggy, it was actively misleading in some cases. What makes AI different, or perhaps what makes our approach to measuring AI different that might finally give us some clarity?
The big problem is that most past predictions, and even current ones, tend to focus on theoretical capability. What could AI do? The new metric, what they call observed exposure, changes the game by combining that theoretical capability with real-world usage data. It's like saying, yes, a self-driving car could navigate a racetrack at 200 miles an hour, but observed exposure asks, is it actually driving kids to school at 30 miles an hour? And how much of that route is truly automated versus a human taking over?
That's a huge distinction. So instead of just the hypothetical, we're looking at what's actually being implemented and used in professional settings, and crucially, how much of that usage is automated versus just augmentative.
Precisely. They're weighting automated uses more heavily because that's where the real displacement risk lies. If AI is just helping you do your job faster, that's augmentation. If it's doing the entire task for you, that's automation, and that's a different beast. They're also focusing on work-related contexts, which is key. My kids using Claude to write a story for school isn't the same as a financial analyst using it to draft a report.
So it's about shifting from potential energy to kinetic energy, from what if to what is. And this observed exposure metric uses three main data sources, right? ONAT for job tasks, their own anthropic economic index for usage, and then the Alundo et al. Theoretical capability score.
That's right. The Alundo et al. Metric, often called beta, scores tasks based on whether an LLM alone can make them twice as fast or if it needs additional tools. But the observed exposure metric is the crucial layer on top. It asks, of those tasks that an LLM could theoretically speed up, which ones are actually seeing automated usage in professional settings right now?
And that leads us directly to this fascinating gap you mentioned earlier. The paper shows that AI is still far from reaching its theoretical capability. Can you unpack that for us? Because I think a lot of people assume if AI can do something, it is doing it everywhere.
That's the common misconception, and this paper provides a really stark visual representation of that gap. Think of it like this. AI has this incredible theoretical muscle, but it's only flexing a small portion of it in the real world right now. The Alundo et al. Metric, that theoretical capability, shows that for categories like computer and math occupations, LLMs could theoretically penetrate 94% of tasks. That's massive.
94%? That sounds like a sci-fi nightmare for programmers.
It does, right? But then you look at the observed exposure, what people are actually using an LLM like Claude for in professional settings, and for that same computer and math category, it's only 33%. That's a huge difference, a 2/3 gap between what's possible and what's practical.
Wait, so AI could write almost all the code, but in reality, it's only assisting with a third of the tasks right now. Why such a big discrepancy? Are businesses just slow to adopt?
It's a mix of factors. Some tasks that are theoretically possible might not show up in usage because of current model limitations. They're just not good enough yet for certain nuances. Then you have legal constraints, specific software requirements, the need for human verification in critical tasks, or just sheer inertia and the cost of integrating new systems. For example, the theoretical capability might say an LLM can authorize drug refills. That's a beta of 1.0.
Which sounds incredibly efficient. A doctor's office would love that.
Absolutely. But they haven't observed Claude actually doing that task in the real world. Why? Because of all those practical hurdles, legal requirements, patient safety, system integration. So while the theoretical potential is there, the observed application is nil, or at least not registered as automated usage.
That makes so much sense. It's the equivalent of having a super fast self-driving car, but needing a lawyer to approve every turn, an IT specialist to manage the GPS, and a human to press the go button every time. The potential is there, but the real-world deployment is bottlenecked.
Perfect analogy. And the paper emphasizes that this gap is what their observed exposure measure is tracking. As capabilities advance and adoption spreads, that red area of actual usage will grow to cover the blue area of theoretical possibility. That's the real story unfolding.
So who is actually on the hot seat with this new metric? Who are the jobs seeing the highest observed exposure right now? Because I think a lot of our listeners, myself included, have some preconceptions about that.
Well, based on their data from Anthropic's Claude, the top spot, perhaps not surprisingly, given the previous point about computer and math, goes to computer programmers. They have a 75% observed coverage.
75%? That's massive. So coding is definitely where a lot of the rubber is meeting the road for AI in terms of actual usage.
Absolutely. The paper mentions that Claude is extensively used for coding. Following them are customer service representatives, whose main tasks are increasingly seen in first-party API traffic, and then data entry keyers, whose primary task of reading source documents and entering data sees significant automation. They're around 67% coverage.
Okay, so programmers, customer service, data entry. That makes intuitive sense for areas where AI excels at repetitive, structured, or information processing tasks. But what about the other end of the spectrum? Who are the least exposed?
At the bottom end, about 30% of workers have zero coverage. These are tasks that appeared too infrequently in their data to meet the minimum threshold, or simply aren't suitable for LLM automation yet. This group includes jobs like cooks, motorcycle mechanics, lifeguards, bartenders, dishwashers, and dressing room attendants.
Okay, so hands-on, physical, unpredictable, or highly social roles are still largely untouched. That aligns with some predictions, but the top-end jobs are definitely a surprise. It's not just the low-skill roles that are seeing this observed automation.
Exactly. And that's where the demographic surprise comes in. The paper takes the top quartile of observed exposure and compares those workers to the 30% with zero exposure, looking at data from before ChatGPT's release. The differences are striking.
Tell me, this is the part that really made me do a double take.
So the more exposed group is 16 percentage points more likely to be female, 11 percentage points more likely to be white, and almost twice as likely to be Asian. But here's the kicker. They earn 47% more on average and have significantly higher levels of education.
47% more, and higher education. So the narrative of AI coming for the low-wage, low-skill worker first is just not playing out in the observed data. It's the opposite.
It really is. For example, people with graduate degrees make up only 4.5% of the unexposed group, but they're 17.4% of the most exposed group. That's almost a fourfold difference. This challenges the idea that higher education or higher pay inherently provides a shield against automation. In fact, it might make you more exposed right now because many of those roles involve tasks that are highly amenable to LLM assistance, things like writing, analysis, synthesis, code generation.
So if you're a highly educated, well-paid knowledge worker, your tasks are precisely the ones that current LLMs are best at automating or augmenting. It's not about being replaced yet, but your day-to-day work is becoming more and more AI intervened.
Precisely, and this makes perfect sense when you consider the nature of LLMs. They excel at language-based tasks, information processing, and problem-solving within defined parameters. These are often the core functions of those higher-paid, more educated roles.
Okay, so we've got a new, more accurate way to measure exposure, and we know who is exposed: high-earning, educated knowledge workers. But you also said that despite this, we're not seeing a massive increase in unemployment. That's the unemployment paradox, right? What's going on there?
Yes, the unemployment paradox is a critical finding. The paper's core analysis focuses on unemployment because, as they argue, it's the most direct measure of economic harm. A worker who is unemployed wants a job and hasn't found one. Other metrics, like a decline in job postings, don't necessarily signal harm because those workers might shift to new roles.
So unemployment is the clearest signal of job displacement. And what does the data say since late 2022, after ChatGPT really burst onto the scene?
Their analysis of the current population survey data shows no systematic increase in unemployment for workers in the most exposed occupations compared to the least exposed. The trends in unemployment rates have been largely similar between the two groups. If anything, there's a slight, statistically insignificant increase for the exposed group, but it's indistinguishable from zero.
That's a huge relief, honestly. All the doomsday predictions haven't materialized into mass layoffs for programmers or customer service reps. But does that mean we're completely in the clear, or is it too early to tell?
It's definitely too early to pop the champagne. The paper actually gives a good sense of scale. They say that if AI caused a great recession for white-collar workers, meaning unemployment rates in the top quartile of exposure doubled from, say, 3% to 6%, their analysis would be able to detect that. So, the fact that they haven't detected anything significant means we haven't hit that level of disruption yet.
So the current level of automation and augmentation isn't leading to widespread job losses. That's good news for now. But there's a subtle signal, a canary in the coal mine, that is starting to show up, particularly for younger workers.
Absolutely. This is where the nuanced evidence emerges. While general unemployment isn't spiking, the paper does find suggestive evidence that hiring of younger workers has slowed in these exposed occupations. Specifically, they looked at workers aged 22 to 25.
Ah, the new entrants to the workforce. This is a big one. So it's not about people getting fired, but about new people not getting hired.
Precisely. Brynjolfsson et al. In a related paper reported a 6 to 16% fall in employment for this age group in exposed occupations, attributing it primarily to a slowdown in hiring rather than increased separations. This new paper corroborates that. They found that the job-finding rate for young workers entering exposed occupations decreased by about 0.5 percentage point in 2024 compared to the less exposed jobs.
Okay, so 0.5 percentage point might not sound like a lot, but what does that translate to?
It translates to an averaged estimate of a 14% drop in the job-finding rate compared to 2022 for these young workers in exposed occupations. That's pretty significant for new graduates trying to break in. And crucially, there's no such decrease for workers older than 25. This suggests companies might be using AI to increase the productivity of their existing, more experienced talent, rather than hiring new, less experienced talent to do those same tasks.
So if you're a young programmer, for example, who's just graduated, you might be facing a tougher time landing that first job, because the company can now use AI tools to make their current senior programmers even more efficient, reducing the need for entry-level hires.
That's one of the key interpretations. The paper acknowledges a few caveats, like young workers might simply be staying in school longer, taking different jobs, or that job transitions can be mismeasured in surveys. But the signal is there. It's a subtle shift, not a dramatic explosion, but it's definitely something to watch. It suggests that AI's impact might manifest not through mass layoffs, but through a more gradual, insidious drying up of entry-level opportunities in certain fields.
That's a critical distinction. It's a different kind of disruption, less of a sudden earthquake, more of a slow shifting tide that makes it harder for new boats to get to shore.
Exactly. And it means we need to think differently about how we prepare the next generation for the workforce. If these jobs are becoming harder to enter, what does that mean for education and career pathways?
All right, this has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive into how AI is actually impacting the labor market, not just theoretically. So let's distill this down. What are the key takeaways our listeners should really internalize from this research?
First, we need to be skeptical of past predictions and buzzwords. The new observed exposure metric, which focuses on real-world automated usage rather than just theoretical capability, is a much more grounded way to understand AI's impact. Second, there's a massive gap between what AI can do and what it's actually being used for in professional settings. This gap offers a crucial buffer, but it's also the frontier we need to watch as AI capabilities and adoption continue to grow. Third, the jobs and demographics most exposed to AI right now are not what many might expect. We're talking about higher paid, more educated, often older and female knowledge workers, like computer programmers and customer service reps, rather than solely low-wage physical laborers.
Fourth, despite the significant observed exposure, we are not currently seeing widespread unemployment increases. So the sky isn't falling for the general workforce, at least not yet, and not in terms of direct job displacement.
And finally, the most telling signal, the canary in the coal mine, is a subtle but significant slowdown in hiring for young workers, specifically 22 to 25-year-olds, in these highly exposed occupations. This suggests a potential shift in how companies staff roles, favoring augmentation of existing talent over new entry-level hires.
That's a lot to chew on. So for our listeners, I'd leave you with this. How does understanding observed exposure change your perspective on your own career path or hiring strategies? And if this trend of slowed hiring for young workers in exposed fields continues, what ripple effects might that have on education and economic mobility in the coming years?
That's all for this episode of Tech Disruptions. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious out there.